Hi everybody, welcome back to the Active Concepts YouTube channel. My name is Meg Mullins. I'm a technical marketing specialist here, and today we're doing a little bit of something different. So welcome to the first AC Trend Watch. We're going to be talking all things fragrance with our first ever guest, Mark Knitowski. Hi Mark.
Meg, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited about taking all your customers through fragrance.
All about fragrance. So Mark is actually the king of fragrance. This is why we've brought him on to our first ever fragrance with benefits, like deep dive, really. Yep. We're going to be picking your brain. You're going to be teaching me, because I'm a fragrance newbie, kind of where we're seeing the fragrance industry going and how brands can really get in on this wave of the new definition of fragrance with benefits.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to having a discussion and, again, understanding more about how your customers can use fragrance, how they can leverage fragrance, and that partnership of benefits and fragrance, skincare benefits and fragrance itself.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait.
No, it's going to be fun.
Mark, I need you to help me just address the elephant in the room here. What is fragrance with benefits when we're talking about this? Like, people at home are like, what?
I think fragrance has been known for olfactive impression and how it smells, the odor it gives off. And it hasn't really been looked at from a skincare benefit perspective, which, most people, most brands want the fragrance to be connecting emotionally. So they don't think about, oh, you know what, I have to have skincare benefits. But if we look at the industry and we look at how it's evolved, where facial skincare ingredients are now in makeup because they saw the advantage. We have to evolve, because if we're not evolving, we become irrelevant. So I think for me is, how do we incorporate skincare benefits into fragrance? And we know fragrance is about 70 to 80% alcohol, very drying to skin.
Yep.
And as that mist category grows more and more, especially with Gen Z and Gen A, how do we make sure that they're getting not just the benefit of the fragrance, but also helping their skin so it's moisturized, hydrated, and any of those dry patches kind of can work in benefit-led businesses.
Exactly. I think there's a lot of maybe confusion too for customers, because they're like, there's millions of fragrances. Some of them can smell the same. And I think adding something else to a fragrance, these skincare benefits, whether it's like sensorial, tactile, sometimes certain fragrances can leave like a tackiness. There's so many different points of fragrance that need to be successful in order to have something that hits all those points for the consumer, not even bringing in like marketing and stuff like that. But Mark, I think you need to give me like for dummies, fragrance for dummies, so I can understand this idea.
I think fragrance is so subjective. I don't think there's such thing as dummies. I think there's an evolution of how you look at fragrances, and everyone's different. I mean, I work a lot with major perfumers, master perfumers, all the fragrance houses, and everyone has a different perspective of what's important and what isn't. I think for me personally, I think there's a balance, right? I know top, mid, and dry notes, a lot of people use. Top notes are the smallest molecules, most volatile, usually citrus. Your middle molecules are usually florals. There's some aromatherapeutic herbal notes. And then your dry molecules, or your base notes, are usually your large molecules. A lot of like vanilla, woods, musks. I tend to think that that's interesting, the pyramid. They call it a pyramid, right? Oh, top, mid, and dry.
I didn't know that.
But the issue I have with that is there's very few fragrances that are linear, meaning that stay the same. I look at fragrances more as movement. So while there's movement where you may have a little citrus off top, it doesn't go away just because it's off the top. It actually works with the other notes to create a dimensional olfactive experience that from the top when you first smell it to maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes later to an hour continues to evolve because of the way those molecules interact with each other and work to partner. So the bigger molecules, like your background, will get bigger. Your citrus will get smaller. It doesn't go away. It just blends differently.
Wow.
And in that blending, you figure out, oh, wow, do I like that? So some people, oh, I love the initial.
Yeah.
And other people be like, oh, I don't like the initial, but on dry down, it smells amazing. And it's all how the molecules evolve and kind of create the end state for the fragrance based on consumer skin.
Wow.
And how it diffuses.
I'm so glad that we have people like you that know the intricacies of these notes. And, I think a lot of consumers, they just go into Bath and Body Works and they're like, oh my God, scent overload, right? And I think the direction that fragrance is going, as we see more brands come out with different fragrance lines, like Glossier came out with like their more like like several
Right.
more. But I can feel, I'm sure you can feel, this shift in fragrance, like the way that brands are pushing out fragrance. It has much more of a different, much more meaningful quality to it. And I think this is speaking to those fragrance with benefits, those skincare benefits, and kind of this holistic wellness almost, which is a huge trend that we're seeing in the skincare space. Wellness from the inside out. But fragrance is now dipping its toes in to the same kind of idea, I think.
Well, I think part of it is, there was over 5,000 fragrances launched last year. So 5,000 fragrances, how many good fragrances are there, or how many fragrances that are good get lost because there's so many?
Yeah.
So as we think about the skinification of fragrance, right, and skincare with benefits, how do we make that fragrance evolve? Now, I think brands are trying to do it. I think there's this dynamic, though, that's tough to balance, right? Because people love the mist or fragrances because it's not tacky. I can put it on, I can put my shirt on, I can put my sweater on, and I'm not sticking to myself. I think other brands have tried to do it. I know J'adore did what they call a mist. It's really a body milk. It's an emulsion. I think Henry Rose has tried to do it, water-based formula, really tacky. I know Clean probably has done it the best of the ones I've seen. And we know Bella Hadid has tried to do it with the dual phase.
Yeah.
So I think people are trying to do it. I think there's this balance. You have to understand that if people are going to use fragrance as a body mist and we're going to put skincare benefits in it, it has to your point earlier, the texture has to be where it's non-tacky. Because people use it once, if it's sticking to me, and they're not going to use it again.
Yeah.
And part of what we want them to use is come back for the fragrance, right? So you got to make sure you get the balance of the fragrance has impact, has memorability, and really drives an emotional connection, as well as, I have skincare benefits that don't impede the way I can wear my clothes.
Yeah.
And it's a tough balance right now because you need there's a volatility piece. And I think at Active Concepts, you guys have so many great ingredients that I think can work and balance, a benefit with the fragrance. And what I love about Active Concepts is the innovation you guys are always looking at, always evolving to try to find out how to solve for something like, okay, we're doing these formulas, but we have to get rid of that tackiness. Someone like myself would come to you and say, I want to do something alcohol-free, but I'm struggling.
Right.
The other thing I think with alcohol is that California's the VOC is you're going to have to not have alcohol, or it's going to have to be so low that you're going to have to figure it out. So I think the evolution, whoever can figure out how to use a non-alcohol version fragrance that isn't tacky or isn't oily is really going to win. I actually think it's something that I've been trying to do for a long time. I've seen some promise, but I think what you guys are working on is always evolving new ingredients. I think there's going to be things we can leverage.
Definitely. Good partnership.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
I think something that, in the ingredient space that could really translate over to the fragrance space and be in this kind of middle ground is this encapsulation. So what if we could encapsulate something that's not only going to give skin a great feel, it's going to maybe even help the fragrance stay longer. It's going to help, our skin's elasticity, collagen production. This is like the dream, right? This would be fragrance with benefits like to a T. How close are we to this?
I think there's a lot of obstacles because of what you can encapsulate, what kind of medium that encapsulation has to be in. Also, the kind of carrier. So if I'm using a bottle with a pump, I'm going to break the encapsulation right when I spray it.
Okay, yeah.
So I got to understand, how do you do it in a way where you can leverage the encapsulation in a way that once you apply it, it's still viable.
Right.
So that's the challenge.
That is a challenge.
I do think there's ways to do it. But that's another evolution of how does packaging for fragrance change to complement ideas of skinification and skincare benefits for fragrance. And I haven't seen a big evolution of packaging for fragrance. It's the same old that we've used ever since I can remember.
Yeah, like a mister.
Right. So how do we evolve that, to make sure that they're marrying back together? That if we do an encapsulation, that it adds value to the skin and the person. Yeah. Rather than, it's in the bottle, but when I spray it, I break the encapsulation. Right.
It's happening in the air in front of you.
It's a tough balance. It's a tough balance.
Wow. I think what a lot of consumers don't see behind the scenes, is this kind of deep dive looking into how the molecules are moving, how they're interacting. But I think what people would love to learn from you, I do, are some of these more technical terms that you're saying. So flashing off and help.
Sure. I mean, flashing off is when you first apply a fragrance. The goal is the alcohol leaves, so you don't smell the alcohol. So the goal is the alcohol is going to push your top notes.
Okay.
So the volatility of the alcohol will work with the ingredients, like your citruses or some of your florals, and push off.
And
so
like have that first
give you that
impact.
bloom. You give you the bloom. So the bloom is the initial impact of what the fragrance achieves when you first spray it.
Ooh.
Then your sillage is as it dries down and someone walks by you. So let's say you have a beautiful fragrance on and you walk by someone and someone says, Meg, oh my gosh, what are you wearing? It smells so good. And you'll say, oh, that's, such and such a fragrance. Your sillage is that trail that follows you.
Oh.
And really creates the ambiance around your personality.
The vibe.
Yep. And it's something that, again, how the fragrance is created, how it's manipulated, how it's formulated can dictate, is that heavier? Is it fresher? How it works together.
I'm fascinated. Like, I very rarely do I ever speak with people who are known for like this deep knowledge of something that I've really never heard of. Like, usually I'm like, okay, yeah, fragrance. But you're like, fragrances, you have this passion when you talk about it. And I think it makes it easy to want to learn more about it. So that's why I'm really happy that you're here, because I think the trend for fragrance, at least as we move forward, right? It's always kind of this cycle. Like we used to see years ago, like this biphase kind of emulsion, you shake it and like you spray it. And now it went away for a while. Everything was like clear. People were freaked out by like milky looking sprays.
Right. Well, because I think everything's an evolution.
Yeah.
And what's old is new, right? It comes back around. So I think everyone's always looking at the fragrance business right now is on fire. I mean, it's growing quickly. It's got the biggest CAGR of almost anything out there. So I think people are trying to figure out how to manage that to maintain it, right?
Right.
And part of that is through skinification, skincare benefits and fragrance. Part of it is understanding how to manipulate the fragrance in different forms, different textures, so that you're giving an experience. It's all about the experience. Fragrance is about a journey. I like to describe it as fragrance. People will say to me, I get in this argument with a lot of people, and a lot of people disagree with me, so just bear with me.
Okay.
So a lot of people will say to me, Mark, what are the notes? I'm like, I'm not telling you the notes. What do you know? I want to know what's in it.
Gatekeeping
I'm like,
the notes.
I'm not telling you the notes. And they say, well, why not? I go, fragrance to me, as how I was taught by my mentor, Ron Winograd, who's my mentor. I spent about 15 years learning from him. Wow. He would say, Mark, fragrance is a dream. When you give people the notes, you're basically giving them the dream. But when you don't give them the notes, they're creating the dream themselves of what they think that fragrance is. I'm not opposed to giving someone notes after they smell it. But I'm not going to give you the notes and say, oh, it's got patchouli, rose, and lily, and then you're telling me I don't want to smell it because I don't like rose.
Yeah, I don't like it.
Right.
But what if I would like it?
So it's interesting, when we did a lot of fragrances at VS, those things where we would test like that rose fragrance or rose idea, but we wouldn't tell them. And a lot of people who hated rose be like, I never smelled the rose. Because fragrance is about, again, that movement. The rose may be in there, and marketing may want to call it out because it's a trend, but it may not be a dominant force that would make you not like a fragrance if you don't like rose. So to me, it's a lot about that balance of how things work together.
Wow. I think this is an interesting point because, when you're fragrance shopping, people will be like, oh, you'll take like a quiz or something. Oh yeah, I like fruity notes, vanilla. You're like kind of rolling your eyes. So tell me why you don't like this.
Because I think it's an interesting game to play. I think, and I know a lot of people will say, well, Mark, people are selling fragrance on the internet. They're not even smelling them. Okay. Yeah. We'll see how that goes. I'd love to know how many returns people get,
right.
And maybe they love them, maybe they don't. But fragrance is about an experience. It's about the journey. It's about taking you somewhere that you create memories around. You create this dynamic of that fragrance holds a place in time in my life. Mm-hmm. And because of that place in time, I can go back to that. Because we know the limbic system has the strongest memory recall, and fragrance and smell is the strongest memory recall of any senses.
In our brain, the limbic system.
Exactly.
Ooh.
So I think for me, fragrance has always been about a journey and much more about a dream than a destination. When you give people the notes, you've given them the destination. It's like, okay, here's what's in it. But when you don't give them the notes, you're basically guiding them, letting them guide themselves to what that fragrance becomes to them. And that's how I think fragrance is that, may be popular. People create their own memories for them.
Yeah, and I think
So
that's true for a lot of people. They have this like nostalgic feeling towards a certain fragrance, like, oh,
yeah,
my mom used to wear, Chanel #5.
for sure, for sure. Or I mean, I remember a time when I was working, we did a fragrance, and the worst thing you could do when you develop fragrances for a brand is discontinue a fragrance.
Mm.
We go to store, we discontinue a fragrance, and you don't know how many times, probably half a dozen, maybe more, where someone came up to me and was like, you discontinued this fragrance X. That fragrance was a fragrance that, I was wearing when my husband proposed to me, and I don't have it anymore. And you're sitting here like, you don't realize the connection during
Took
the
the
creative.
memory away from them,
Well,
basically.
how bad is that, right? So
Oh my
those are
God.
things that I never realized until you start to. I love spending time in store with people and understanding how they view fragrances, how they talk about fragrance, because there is no fragrance language. So unlike wine, where you know what a Pinot Noir is, you know what a Pinot Grigio, you know a Chardonnay, you know where it's grown, you know the vintage, you know the year.
Right.
The struggle I've always had with fragrances, there's no real defined classification. Someone may call it a fruity floral, but we did this experiment where we had the top 30 fragrances in the market, and we had a bunch of different companies kind of tell us how you would classify them, fragrance companies. And out of those 30, only 3 of the fragrances were classified by the 4 houses the same way. So if you have 27 fragrances that people are classifying differently, what's the rhyme or reason if I'm trying to talk to a consumer about a fragrance language? I wish we were better as a fragrance industry at being able to have a common language that customers would understand better, like they know what a vintage Pinot Noir is, or a Grigio, or a Chardonnay, or a Boudoir. I don't think we've done a good job of helping the consumers to understand, the different classifications, because I don't think there's really a foundation that's been built. There's a floral, there's a woody,
Fruity.
there's warm, there's vanilla. You're always trying to evolve it.
Interesting.
So it's something I've struggled with, just trying to understand when you speak to so many customers in store and you're trying to understand that language piece.
And I think customers too, at least in the skincare side, they're looking for like clean or natural. And then kind of this, oh, I don't want synthetic ingredients, but I want to achieve this fragrance.
We're going to go here, are we?
We're going here.
Okay.
Give me kind of like your understanding. I think this is a big misconception.
So I have a visceral reaction to that.
I could see it.
I struggle when people say natural fragrances are the only way to go. And the reason I say, and I will, anyone who ever wants to debate me on this, I have no problem getting a group together and debating it. Because here's what happens. People see internet, they see social media. Oh my gosh, this fragrance is bad for my dog. Oh my gosh, this fragrance, fragrance is bad. And I think there's a celebrity recently who posted that, the one thing in your house that can create cancer, bad word.
They're claiming
that. Yeah. So what I would say to you is, do you know 90% of the fragrance ingredients that have been discontinued are naturals? And not that. So people say, well, synthetics are bad for you. I would say, I think there's a balance. You need both.
Balance.
Natural ingredients have a higher level of irritation actually than synthetics, because synthetics are built around the chemistry to understand what's safe. That's what I don't understand is when I see people saying synthetics aren't safe or synthetic, they're tested more thoroughly than naturals. And they actually are better for sustainability, because a lot of the naturals, once you take them out of the environment, it may take 100 years for them to grow back, like a sandalwood from Australia.
Gone.
Right.
Yeah.
So my feeling is, I would love to have a conversation with someone and we've tried to do this on a couple mediums I'm on, and people really struggle with, well, natural is the only way to go. I think there's a combo of both. Mm-hmm. I think that we have to do a better job as an industry of understanding and telling people how safe synthetics are, right. Because I think naturals are good to a degree, but when someone says, oh, so all synthetics are bad, that someone to me is uneducated and is just trying to sell something that they are trying to present from a marketing position.
Right. It's kind of like greenwashing a little bit, especially if you don't understand the interplay between the two things. Because I think on ingredient labels, you'll just see fragrance has fragrance. No. And people are like, oh, it's so secret. They're hiding, toxins in there.
Well, I think the fragrance being called out as fragrance, there's a couple of reasons for that. And I think it's getting better because now you got to call out the allergens, right? Yep. So I think the one reason was fragrance is the interesting thing that has defined by intellectual property. So those formulas that are developed for fragrances, the goal is not to give them out so other people can knock them off. That doesn't mean someone can't try to GC it and do it. But the goal is there's intellectual property that goes along with those fragrances that the houses in the brand zone. So for me, I think there's a balance there of how do you look at that ownership of which fragrance, which should I tell and which should I not tell? IFRA guides what you can and can't use.
Right.
There's always another IFRA this, IFRA that. Every time I turn around, there's more ingredients that are on being classified for concern. And most of them are naturals. It's kind of interesting. But I think IFRA, and I think the fragrance houses, if you were looking for a guide of what not to use or where the regulations are coming from, IFRA is the one who sets them. The fragrance house then translates that to the brand of, hey, you know what? If you're going to use this fragrance ingredient, you can't use it above X%. If you're going to use this ingredient, you can't use it above that percent, based on IFRA's guidelines. And a lot of times it's guidelines around irritation more than anything.
Right.
And a lot of them, it's more, there's synthetics that have guidelines too, but a lot of it's naturals that have, just as many naturals have guidelines as synthetics. So I challenge anyone who wants to have that conversation, but you have to be open-minded, right? If we're gonna have the dialogue around you like naturals and hate synthetics, and I think both are good, I would just like you to have an open mind. If you're gonna fight, not even be open-minded about it, we're not gonna have a good discussion.
Yeah.
But if we can have a discussion on why you believe naturals are the only way to go, and I can understand why you think that, and then you can be open to why I think synthetics are an opportunity where they shouldn't be given a hard rap like they are, then I think you can have the discussion. But if someone's like, no, I know what I'm talking about. I've been doing this for over 30 years. I've worked with master perfumers. I've worked with every fragrance house. The last thing they need is something that's going to be have an issue that they're going to get called out for. It's the last thing they need.
Yeah.
So I think there's a balance, and we're doing a lot of work on understanding to be able to prove that out, so that people can't just say, oh, this ingredient's going to do this, or this ingredient, is going to be harmful or allergic. So we're trying to get a better handle on it.
I think that's a cool kind of point that you said. Like, it's a discussion. It's all about balance, and it's important to educate the consumer too. Something that I think a lot of people could use your educational experience on is when you encounter fragrance, this nostalgic element that people yearn for and that they chase and that they have this loyalty towards. How can a brand, if they're starting from the ground up and they're like, okay, I've watched this excellent AC trend watch about fragrance and I want to do this. I want to encapsulate all these different elements that we've talked about. What should be their guiding point? I
think having a strong position of what they believe in. That understanding the market, understanding what you believe you want to do from a storytelling perspective. It all comes back to storytelling for me, because storytelling is the biggest way to have the connection. But then understanding based on that storytelling, look at the white space in the market. Is there a white space for it? Or has it been done so many times that you better think about how to maneuver and position it? I think understanding the trends, what ingredients are trending, how are they trending? Do you want to be something that, has a slower build, right? So that you're unique and different, and that customers may need some time to gravitate through that. And I think a good example of that is Le Labo Santal 33. That fragrance, most urban areas, you smell it everywhere. But that fragrance, I remember when they launched that, and everyone was like, oh my gosh, what is this? But it's a fragrance that has a ton of recognition, ton of recall, ton of signature. And also, it's something that consumers make it ownable because they know what it is. And that's more of a niche idea. And I would say, when we did Bombshell, when we did it, so what were we trying to tell the story? The story was, we want a fragrance that's indicative of the Victoria's Secret brand so strongly that, as you know, when you see a Victoria's Secret bag from 3 blocks away, the stripe on stripe, it's Victoria's Secret bag.
You can smell it when you're seeing it, even though there's nothing around you that smells like it.
So the goal was to create a fragrance that did that.
Yeah.
So when we did Bombshell, we used a men's note that no one was really using, and kind of incorporated into what we knew the customer liked. So we knew the customer liked fruity. We knew she did.
Yep.
But how did you balance that then with other elements? And other elements were how do we make it a little fresher? And to our surprise, and I worked with Adriana Medina from a company called Givaudan, and she was really open, and we had a great dialogue. But the goal is really, how do you make this thing come to life? And what we did is we created a dimension, and the sillage of that created a whole new definition for the brand.
Yep.
That had success with other fragrances, but that one, for some reason, connected so well. And the vision was, how do we create something that was so branded when you smell it, you knew the brand? And, again, it took some time, but we got to where You know, it was memorable, recognizable, and that's more of. I use the two examples as you have Santel, which took time, was an indie brand that built, and I take Victoria's Secret, which is everywhere, and customers resonated. So you can do it both ways. You just have to understand the story you're trying to tell and the brand you're trying to create.
Exactly. And understanding your consumer too is important.
It's hugely important.
The trends in fragrance that we're kind of seeing, like other than, of course, this fragrance with benefits, what are you kind of seeing the most in your experience?
I think this gourmand trend's always evolving,
Gourmand.
right?
What's that?
So gourmand is edible ingredients. You know,
chocolate.
Chocolate's not really. It's interesting. Chocolate hasn't really trended. Coconut, praline, pistachio. Those are notes that we're starting to see come more and more to the forefront of a different dynamic. So I think gourmand. I think green notes evolving, where people may start, looking at, can hemp be a viable option in green notes that can create a different olfactive impression. I'm working with a master perfumer right now, and we're trying to get this little thing going together, him and I, with some other people, that is looking at can you make hemp viable where olfactively it creates an impression. And it isn't about like mood enhancing from a visceral thing. It gives you a nice element of just a different dimension to a fragrance that not a lot of people have looked at doing. So we're trying to figure that out.
And I think a lot of people are talking about, in all industries, not just like, skincare, hair care, but there's this AI fascination.
Yeah.
Is there any fragrance AI trend that we should
I think the AI trend for me is more about customer for fragrance.
Okay.
So I struggle, and I'm with a lot of perfumers on this who struggle with AI because you're impeding my creative insight. I think AI used from a customer lens to understand what's the customer's expectation of fragrance. Does a fragrance, a concept, a bottle, and a name work together? I think that's great for AI. If I have a great fragrance and I don't have the right positioning, I don't have the right bottle, right name, well, I may lose a great fragrance because it doesn't work. So I think AI is great for the marketing idea of how holistically things come together. I think for AI from a creative perspective struggles where if a note hasn't been used, right, would AI know to use it? And I think that's where the perfumer's intuition of using, a big amber note like that's in with ethyl maltol, which is a cotton candy note, in Baccarat Rouge, or pistachio that's in the Sol 62. Like, would AI ever have thought of that? Right. So I think you need the creative element of perfumers being able to have that feel, that sensibility, that emotion that I just don't think AI's. Now, I think everyone should understand what AI's capabilities are and understanding how you may leverage them. But I don't think we're there yet from a creative perspective.
Yeah. So if brands are wanting to jump on this, like, fragrance with benefits, adding in this skin benefit element, AI doesn't have a nose, but you do. Yeah. I do.
I think you could use AI to understand how to balance like what ingredients people are expecting in fragrance.
Okay.
So like performance. So if I'm doing skinification and skincare benefits, where's a customer's mindset? Is she open to, hey, I want it to be more moisturizing, or hey, yeah, if it had this in it, I would like it, or all the great ingredients that Active Concepts has. If you did a list of 4 or 5 and they had to prioritize which ones would be most important in a fragrance and the value of that ingredient to the fragrance, it'd be interesting to see which ones would resonate the most. And then I think you could start to tell that story from a skincare lens and almost balance the benefit and the fragrance equally, rather than it being fragrance-led or skincare-led, almost balance them more equally.
Having them be like yin and yang.
Exactly.
And they work together beautifully.
Rather than just an adjacency one to the other or vice versa.
Yeah, they kind of go hand in hand rather than being...
One's a driver versus the other one.
I think we're trying to, help brands with this a lot. And I think a lot of our ingredients that we've been coming out with, we've done something that we hadn't been doing before, which was like more extensive alcohol compatibility testing, because we're seeing this shift towards using these skincare, hair care ingredients in like fragrance mists that do have a lot of alcohol. But as we are kind of seeing this shift away from overly alcoholic percentages in our body mists and sprays, I think it's going to be interesting to see where it goes next.
Well, I think it's part of what's the customer mindset, like where are they willing to go and how long, or what's their trajectory to get them there, right? As you start to look at this, where's the customer willing to go, and what is she willing to give up or not, to make sure that when we do those skincare with skin benefits, that there may be a little trade-off. Is she willing how far is she willing to go? And to me, the biggest trade-off is the dryness, like making sure that you can get the volatility so you don't get the tackiness. If you can figure out, like, as using the great active ingredients, if we can figure out the balance so we can get rid of the tackiness, and that people can wear, put on their clothes and not feel sticky, and still have the volatility or the fragrance impression, I think that's what the win will be. And again, like, everything's always evolving. You guys are always evolving new ingredients at Active Concepts. So I think there's going to be an opportunity of, hey, you know what, this something can really work with fragrance, instead of alcohol. And you've done that now. It's just with that balance to make sure it makes sense.
And again, that education aspect is big too. And that's why
huge.
We wanted to bring you here, because I'm not a fragrance expert.
I think for me, fragrance has always been so indicative of where people are at in their life and where they're feeling, that how do you make that come to life? And that was my passion for fragrance, was just around seeing people's face, making people smile, and just really the connectivity that I've been fortunate enough to see with customers I've worked with, and then also the evolution of what's next, and how the skincare, we know it worked from skin to makeup. There's no reason it can't go from skin to fragrance. It's just, how do you get the consumer, to your point, marketing, so they understand it? And then how do we use the right technology to make sure that the performance, while it may not be the exact same as alcohol, has a similarity that gives you, takes away the negative of alcohol, but the positive for what it does.
Exactly. I think this was a very, insightful conversation that we've had. I feel like I've learned a lot.
No, I'm hoping. I mean, for me, it's always about, I appreciate you having me, because I do think I'm so passionate about fragrance and the evolution of where it's going to go and how we're going to get there. And I think it's people like you and Active Concepts that helps us to look at it and challenge ourselves to how do we do it differently? How do we not say, oh, that can't be done? And, what does that look like so we can get there? Because it's got to evolve or you become irrelevant.
Yeah.
So.
Evolve or die.
That's it.
And that is our very first AC Trend Watch. Thank you, Mark, for being on this first ever episode.
I'm honored to be here. I appreciate you having me. It's been great to work with you and talk to you and talk to your audience about fragrance.
Yes. And so we will see you next time. And in the meantime, check out Mark on all his amazing social media. Follow him on LinkedIn.
Yep, definitely. Any questions, let Meg know, and we'll make sure we can get some answers back to you.
Drop them below, and we'll see you next time. Bye.